On April 20, 1949, the Washington Post published a newspaper story titled "Mount Rainier Boy of the Priest Free, reported to be imprisoned in Devil's Grip." The article was about a 13-year-old boy named Ronald Edwin Hunker. Normal, who grew up in Cottage City, Maryland, and is haunted. The horrors reported in the documentary were so unbelievable that the story spread like wildfire and soon inspired several works of film and literature, including William Peter Blatty's novel. The soon-to-be huge bestseller The Exorcist came out in 1973 and gained an international reputation as one of the most terrifying horror films ever. Forever. Hello everyone, Moonlit Haunts here, and this is the true story of a St. Louis exorcism. Before we begin, I would like to point out that the most generally accepted evidence given in this case is hearsay, things like where the boy lived, place where exorcisms take place, and who was there at that time. All were later proven to be false. The only reliable primary source from this event is the record of Raymond J. Bishop, one of the participating clergy. Daily activities are recorded every day in a diary. A lot of the information in this video will come from that source. With that, let's get right to the point. Ronald Edwin Hunker was born on June 1, 1935 to a German Lutheran family in Cottage City, Maryland. It should be noted that in the original series he was called Roland Doe or Robbie Mannheim, which are just pseudonyms. Used to protect his identity growing up, he was an only child, so he was very lonely most of the time and relied on the adults in the family to play with him and keep him company. His immediate family consisted of his father, mother, grandparents, and Aunt Harriet, who Ronald took a particular liking to. They were very close, and she was the one who played with him most often. Interestingly, she happened to be an avid spiritualist, so she was into all sorts of mystical practices such as seances, rituals, and especially Ouija boarding. Over time, Ronald expressed his interest in the Ouija board after his Aunt Harriet taught him how to use it. She even got him his own as a birthday gift one year, and he was instantly hooked. She thought it would be a fun pastime activity for the two to bond over, and as a spiritualist herself, she saw nothing wrong with it. For the longest time, no notable paranormal activity occurred as they were using it. However, by the time Ronald had turned 13, he eventually opened himself up to an unparalleled evil. It all started on January 15, 1949. Ronald was conversing with his grandmother in her bedroom, when they suddenly began hearing a faint dripping noise, almost like a leaky faucet. So their initial thought was that there must be some sort of problem with the pipes, or a sink might have accidentally been left on. But as they started searching around for the noise, they eventually found themselves fixated on a picture on the wall. A picture of Jesus. It was shaking as if there had been some sort of impact on the wall behind it, but they never heard a loud bang and there wasn't any reason for the wall to have been hit. As they're staring at this picture trying to figure out what's causing the movement, the shaking and dripping noises suddenly stop. Waiting in total silence, Ronald and his grandmother couldn't help but feel freaked out. His parents eventually arrived at the house later that evening, and he told them everything that happened. But right as they finished their conversation, another eerie sound caught their attention. It sounded like a constant scratching beneath the floorboards. Again, they tried to pinpoint where the noise was coming from, and they eventually circled back to the grandmother's room. The sound was coming from the floorboards right near her bed, and it continued to persist every night between the hours of 7 in the afternoon and midnight. Ronald's parents didn't believe this to be a cause for concern, and chalked the noises up to just some rodent that happened to stumble beneath the. This would explain why it came back each day around the same time. They reassured him that everything was going to be alright, and they soon called an exterminator to take care of it. He came within the next couple of days and sprayed a poisonous chemical beneath the floorboards, which would undoubtedly kill the rodent if it were down there. That same evening, the exterminator eventually left, but the noises still persisted, and this time they were even louder than before. It continued for 10 days straight and finally stopped. Although the entire situation was weird, the family just believed that the poison took a little while to kill the rodent, and they eventually put the whole thing behind them. After these events, Ronald's Aunt Harriet unfortunately passed away at the age of 54 due to multiple sclerosis. Over the next couple of weeks, he was completely devastated and depressed, not wanting to really do anything except mourn her death. And that's when the noises came back. That same scratching sound beneath the floorboards. However, this time it wasn't coming from the grandmother's room on the second story of the house, it was coming from downstairs directly in Ronald's bedroom. Throughout the day, they never heard any noises, and it was only when Ronald decided to climb into bed for the night that they started to occur. One night, while Ronald, his mother and grandmother were sitting on his bed, they experienced something new that scared them stiff. It was these slow, creepy footsteps walking back and forth from the edge of the bed to the back wall over and over again. This is when the family finally started to put two and two together. They wondered if the noises had somehow been linked to the passing of Aunt Harriet, which was kind of odd considering that they started before she passed away. As the footsteps continued, Ronald's mother suddenly shouted, "Is this you, Aunt Harriet?" She asked it to knock on the floor to see if it was indeed the spirit of their deceased family member, to which it responded back with 3 knocks as wind rushed past their faces. At this point, the family didn't know whether to be scared or comforted by the fact that Aunt Harriet's spirit was seemingly inside of the house. But as future events unfolded, it would be revealed that whatever was in the house was not Aunt Harriet at all, but something far more evil. As the days went on, Ronald would walk into his bedroom to find random tears in his mattress, and after he continued to ignore it, the tears would be replaced by violent shaking. Various random items were also thrown around the house from time to time, such as food, clothing, and furniture. By February 26th, the tears from the mattress eventually moved on to Ronald himself. All over his body appeared these deep scratch marks. They almost looked like they had been done by a monstrous claw. They continued for 4 successive nights, until the lesions eventually turned into written words. This is when Ronald's family knew that something had to be done. So his mother began searching around for potential ways that she could help her son. She reached out to several local Lutheran ministers for any insight, and she soon met Luther Miles Schultz. He was extremely helpful and agreed to have the boy spend the night at his house to see if he would experience any supernatural activity. And sure enough, he got what he asked for. During the night, as Ronald was sleeping, he heard the same eerie clawing sounds under the floorboards. He immediately went into a state of panic and began praying in hopes that the evil spirit would vanish, but it only got louder. At one point, Ronald began violently convulsing in his bed, leading Schultz to tie him to a chair until he eventually calmed down. However, the chair immediately threw itself backward onto the floor, as Schultz watched in pure terror. After this incident, a Catholic priest located in Mount Rainier, Maryland, named Father Edward Hughes, was asked for advice on the boy's situation. He never actually met Ronald in person, but he suggested the family use blessed candles and holy water throughout the home, accompanied by intense prayer, to hopefully ward off the evil presence. However, it only made things worse. The bottle of holy water used was reportedly shattered, and the prayers only made the evil spirit more violent and aggravated. Running out of options, Ronald's mother began to contact more and more specialists for help, ranging from psychiatrists to actual spiritualists, but none of them were able to remedy any of the activity occurring at the Cottage City house. She eventually settled on getting Ronald away from the home. She happened to be a native St. Louisiana, so she had many family members in Missouri who were willing to help her out. Ronald was taken to the home of his non-Catholic aunt and uncle, where several other family members would also come around to visit. Ronald's mother had hoped that whatever was plaguing her son would go away if she went to live somewhere else. However, disappointment came when the activity didn't stop and even increased in the following weeks. By March 8th, 2 aunts, 4 uncles, and 4 cousins had all witnessed furniture moving around on its own, the violent shaking and tearing of Ronald's mattress, and the visible scratch marks that would appear all over his body. One cousin in particular was extremely concerned for his safety and tried to do all that he could to figure out what was going on. He happened to be a college student, and one of his classes was taught by Father Raymond J. Bishop, a local Catholic priest. After he was consulted on behalf of the strange events Ronald and his family were experiencing, he was intrigued by the story and agreed to provide assistance to the boy. Another clergyman eventually got involved named Father William Baden, and over the course of the week they tried several different methods of combating the alleged demonic possession. This ranged from dousing Ronald's bed in holy water, to pinning different relics of saints to his pillow as a form of spiritual protection. However, this did absolutely nothing. Father Baden and Bishop even started to get frightened as the relics in holy water were tossed in defiance by an invisible entity. By March 16th, things began to escalate as the clergyman attempted to conduct real exorcisms on Ronald. Due to the increasingly shocking events, a third clergyman was thrown into the mix named Father Walter Halloran. Over the course of 6 days, they performed several exorcisms, each resulting in terrifying outcomes. As they began the process, there were several stitches all over the boy's body as he screamed in pain. Remember that Ronald's hand was behind the bedspread. The priest then realized that he was not doing it for himself. His wound began to bleed slightly. A demonic figure began to be drawn on his right leg. Meanwhile, the word hell was carved on his chest in such a way that if Ronald looked down, he could read clearly. Other words cut into his body showed that it was said that evil spirits could only be expelled through feces or urine. The second part of the exorcism continued while Ronald slept, as the priest began to chant and immerse her in the holy water. He started spanking her buttocks and breasts hard, making her scream out blood-curdlingly. He would later say that at that time he was in a dreamlike state, as if he were communicating with demons. There were other demons obscuring his surroundings in the area of the fire. The next morning, Ronald's father flies out of Maryland after encountering an unbelievable situation. Over the course of several days, the priest tried to bless the boy, but he began throwing tantrums and spitting at the men in his family. In other exorcisms, he began to try to expel the evil spirits from his body, but it didn't work. He became hysterical, cursing the priest with an evil laugh, calling them bastards and vile women, and screamed religious obscenities as he began to frantically urinate on himself. When he later awoke out of his trance, he claimed the urine had burned and he felt as though he were sick. By March 21st, the family was losing sleep and the clergyman arranged for Ronald to be taken to the Election Brothers Hospital in South St. Louis in case there was a medical emergency. He was given a room away from the other patients so they couldn't hear his outbursts. Due to his growing concern, Ronald's father was also given a bed in the same room so he could comfort his son. However, upon his arrival at the hospital, Ronald didn't calm down. He began urinating himself 5 or 6 different times, and his language eventually became disgustingly perverted and sexual towards the clergyman, referring to genitalia and sexual acts. Throughout his time here, he began to fall ill, and he would continue to have his violent outbursts. He wasn't getting good sleep and was always in a constant state of distress when he wasn't under demonic attack. After failed subsequent exorcisms taking place at the hospital, Ronald's mother and father thought it might be best to convert from Lutheran to Catholicism. Ronald was scheduled to be baptized in the next couple of days, and his parents hoped that it might grant some sort of spiritual protection. On April 1st, the baptism took place, but with much difficulty as Ronald kept spiraling into violent episodes. And to the parents' frustration, it did absolutely nothing. Ronald still continued to spit, curse, and have terrifying outbursts. The next day, Ronald was eventually given Holy Communion, which is a Christian Catholic ritual practiced as a remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice. After much struggle, the family and clergyman decided to take Ronald back home since no other remedies were working. However, at the house, he was always in an extreme state of fear. He didn't want to be alone and kept attempting to come downstairs, but everyone decided it was best that he stay in bed and rest. As he walked upstairs back to his bedroom, he suddenly grabbed the reliquary cross off his wall until he was stopped by one of the attending priests. Without releasing his hand, he picked up the open liturgical book of Bishop Romanus and cut out 4 pages of the recipe for exorcism. When she enters another spell, the priest caught her on the bed and immediately tried to calm her down by performing another exorcism. After being asked a question in Latin, he answered in a monotone tone he had never learned before. He felt the same scratches on his body, and at that moment, Ronald was in a daze. Later, she told her family that she couldn't take it anymore, and the constant exorcisms were destroying her body. He really wanted to go back to his home in Maryland, and begged his father to take him with him. By April 4th, after an agreement between the monks and the family, Ronald was allowed to stay at Cottage City for a few days while the priest sought hospital care in Washington, D.C. and surrounding hospitals. Baltimore that might have allowed Ronald to stay. But after hearing what happened, no hospital wanted to deal with him. Father Baden eventually contacted Election Brothers Hospital again in the hope that they would allow them to stay. And the request was approved. On April 10th, Ronald returned to St. Louis Hospital with Father Bishop Baden Halloran and several other priests. This is where the final exorcism will begin. And that's when everything went crazy. Next week Ronald will endure a final exorcism that results in a long-awaited event, the usual kicking, screaming, spitting, and cursing that would often occur. However, there now seemed to be the engraving of the word exit at multiple parts of his body, with an arrow pointing downward to his groin. He exclaimed that his kidneys and groin had this horrible burning sensation that got even worse when he tried to urinate. On April 18th, everything came to a climax. The priests were doing their usual ritual, reading the Principia exorcism prayer, when Ronald suddenly shouted with authority in a sleep-like state, "Satan, Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan and the other evil spirits, to leave the body in the name of Dominus immediately." He then went through 8 minutes of violent convulsions until he finally came to a calm state, saying, "He's gone." He later stated that he was in a dreamlike state where he saw a physical manifestation of Saint Michael, the holy archangel known for vanquishing Satan. Ronald claimed he saw the angel banish Satan back to a fiery pit, as he suddenly awoke from out of a sleeping stupor. As of that day, Ronald Hunker had never experienced anything supernatural since. After the events, he and his family continued their lives as devout Catholics in Maryland, and the priests even stated that he became a fine young man. He never spoke publicly on behalf of the events, and it took nearly 70 years for experts to find out who he actually was. Sadly, he died recently in 2020, due to a stroke at the age of 85, but his story would inspire many for years to come. But that will be the end of today's video. I hope you guys like it. If you are like that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to know the story of the famous Bell Witch that is haunting you, click to watch this video here. Thank you all again. And have a wonderful day.